self-remembering. An individual's understanding of this work is relative to their level of being. They may know the ideas of the work, however, knowledge does not give understanding, because to know does not imply that one understands. Knowledge of this work is of a kind that can act on being, and as a result, give rise to understanding. Understanding is not knowledge, and understanding is not being. Knowledge and being together, in conjunction, give understanding. If my being is such that it wills what I know, the result will eventually be increased understanding. If it does not will what I know, then I shall remain with knowledge only. But if some eyes wish to follow the knowledge of this work, their will to do so eventually passes into understanding on a small scale. Compared with what would happen if the whole being were to act as one, and will as one, in applying the knowledge of this work by living what it says. That would be real will, which is beyond us presently, such as we are. So we have to start from where we find ourselves, with all our separate and conflicting wills, maintaining an inner steadfastness amidst the confusions that take place in our mixed being. We must value the work and keep work eyes in us alive, protecting them from all kinds of crude, rough, cynical or negative eyes. Naturally, unless there were this struggle, there would be no work. To work means to labor, and work means effort against resistance. Work is the effort to connect knowledge of this work with our being, the effort to bring what we know into relation with what we are and have become. For this, self-observation is obviously necessary in order to notice what one is. Knowledge is necessary, in that it reveals what to observe. This is a logical progression, namely to know what one is, we must observe ourselves. Then, in order to know what to observe, we must have knowledge. This work teaches a knowledge, not only of what we have to observe as, for example, negative states, but also what we must do. To practice non-identifying with ourselves, particularly with false personality. All this teaching is in view of the supreme idea of this work, and indeed of all esotericism in the past, that there is a higher level of consciousness possible for mankind. We can only reach this, however, if we clean our machine, getting rid of many useless things that complicate our lives, keeping us in a state of sleep. Here now comes the most important instruction given. Not only must an individual know and observe, but they must remember themselves, and retain these reflections. We must do this because only in that state of consciousness called the state of self-remembering can influences reach us that can act upon our being. For without help we can do practically nothing, or will only affect one thing at the expense of another. Eyes that wish to work and connect knowledge of the work with their lives will feel unhappy if they do not, even become ill or infected if they do not remain awake. These eyes change in their understanding, for they must be nurtured so they can see things in a new way. Which means we have to rethink, revisit and reinterpret the ideas of this work until they make absolute sense and apply to our lives personally. Simply to know that we must observe or self-remember amounts to nothing. The matter must be reflected upon over and over again. We must return to first principles continually. So a fresh perspective on what has been discussed more than once is something that remains fundamental to our success. A question is then asked. There is a difference in quality between the state of self-remembering and an act of self-remembering, many degrees of, or even levels of quality between acts of self-remembering. Yet the least of these is greater than, or on a level above the fullest self-observation. There can be no progress, unless and until someone remembers themselves. All work on ourselves below that level is preparatory, a progression towards consciousness. Furthermore, an individual can protect themselves psychologically only through self-remembering. How can we evaluate, then through evaluation increase our power to value something, not for what it can give us but for what it is, the state of self-remembering? The observation of oneself is not the same thing as remembering oneself. On one occasion, Gurdjieff, when speaking of self-remembering, asked, "Which self do you wish to remember?" This gives some clue as to the meaning of remembering oneself. On another occasion he said that humanity is subnormal, because we are not conscious at the place of incoming impressions. At this point, he said, where external impressions enter, it is necessary to create something, to create a receiver. A student of this work once remarked, I do not understand what the work means when it says that we do not observe ourselves. I have always observed myself. Undoubtedly, it is true to say that a person, to a certain extent, observes themselves. People look into a mirror, and this mirror is constructed from what they have been taught, what they have acquired through upbringing as to right behavior, correct manners, the right things to wear, the right things to say, and the right people to know. This acquired part of us is personality, and the formation of personality in everybody is a question of the period, the environment in which we are born, school and sibling influences, family, the fashion or trends of the day, the nation to which we belong, and the standards which that society sets. Into this mirror everybody gazes. It is not only psychological, but a literal mirror, and our moral compass. That mirror is not the same mirror that the work teaches us to gaze into. A work mirror is something quite different. It has literally nothing to do with whether you eat peas with a knife, put your elbows on the table, cuss out loud, wear the right outfit, or use the right lipstick, and associate with the right people or listen to the right music. A work mirror refers to some quite different kind of self-observation. Through the work mirror it is possible to begin to see what one really is, apart from what we appear to be in public, who we really are and pretend to be. Granted at first that work mirror may be all wrong, which always arises when we do not see what this work is about, and when magnetic center is weak. We still look at ourselves from a life mirror, trying to connect our acquired virtues, perceived through self-love, with some work mirror. Some might reflect upon the knowledge that this work teaches, from which we have to observe ourselves. If so, they may have felt that it seems to teach something, remote from any life path that they are pursuing. For example, what connection is there with our ordinary life when we are told to observe the work of centers? To observe 3 distinct persons within our mind palace, and then to observe the many different eyes in us. To observe our state of sleep, to observe internal considering, and the making of accounts against others, to observe negative emotions, identifying our ignorance, the level of our being, to observe how we never seem to remember ourselves, and so on. It all seems rather vague and remote, or difficult to grasp. Yet, from all these ideas, a real work mirror is formed. No one can look into that work mirror unless they have acquired knowledge of what this work is about, and then loved it. The hair on your arm needs to stand up, and your skin tingle with the sudden realization. This work teaches us from what points of view we need observe ourselves, picking out certain things that we have to notice within. Imagine being told to go into a mega mall, then instructed merely to observe everything. You would obviously experience sensory overload, and not know what it is that you're supposed to observe. Then suppose you are told instead to go into that mall and observe only a few particular things. You would obviously know what you have to take notice of. It is this that the work teaches us. The work teaches how to approach yourself through self-observation, what to notice and what to work against. In this regard, it gives very definite directions which, however difficult they might be to follow, are yet entirely distinctive. If you love the work, if you value it, then you will be able to assimilate the knowledge that it teaches, according to your level of being. If we assimilate even to some small degree the knowledge that it teaches, then we will begin to possess a mirror with which to look at ourselves. For a long time we have poor reflections that distort things. After a time, however, we realize that we possess the wrong attitude toward this work. It is precisely this realization that gives us the new perspective. Then we begin to see ourselves better, and can see how we have treated the work thus far. Self-observation without some form of definite knowledge as to what to observe will lead nowhere in this work, outside of aimless meandering. Ordinary mechanical self-observation may lead us into social life, to meet new people and discover new interests, but this is not the same thing. The mirror of social life is one thing, and into this all people gaze, then crystallize. The work says nothing against this, however, it speaks of another mirror, of something having another quite different quality. The ancient inscription on the Greek temple, "Know thyself," is ineffective when taken out of context. How can you know yourself? People think that they know themselves already, will even beat you to the ground with argument and sophisms. However, this work teaches that we have to know ourselves in a new way, and from certain perspectives at that. The object of this particular kind of knowing oneself is to make it possible to separate from a number of useless perceptions that go on continually in all of us. So we can begin to touch influences coming from a higher level that give us thoughts, feelings and understanding that we have a right to have, but have lost contact with entirely due to our state of sleep. All esoteric teaching is about awakening to far finer influences, right here on this earth. P.D. Ouspensky wrote, "Here now on this planet you can be under different laws and different influences. You can come to know and understand what they mean, provided that you work on yourself." Ouspensky's comments astonished many because they thought that being in a better state meant being in a better world, doubtless that might be reached after death. The general idea taught in the Gospels that one must die to be reborn is taken to mean our physical demise, then rebirth into some other realm called heaven. The work and the Gospels teach, however, that if we can reach higher influences that are already playing on us presently, instead of in some corporeal afterlife, we shall then be in a different state of understanding. The work teaches that we no longer fall under the law of accident, negative emotions in particular, which place us under the outcomes of chance and circumstance. This work is about putting our ordinary centers into the right state so they can transmit intelligently the influences of higher centers which exist in us fully formed and are continually at work, but to which we cannot respond. Why, asks someone, is this so? Because, Ouspensky taught, we are continually identified with 1,001 useless things both in life and in ourselves. He particularly emphasized the importance of working on the negative part of emotional center, saying in so many words that we identify with our negative emotions more than with anything else. It seems as if we feel we have a right to be negative, whereas this work teaches quite the reverse, that we have a right not to be negative. When we are negative, it is as if we had a blood vessel cut, pouring out life force. As long as the negative part of our emotional center, which we were not born with, but have acquired from others, is allowed to exist unchallenged, it is impossible for our emotional center to feel the influences of higher emotional center. It is for this reason that the observation of our negative states, the separation from them, is one of the most important sides of practical work on oneself. The transformation of negative emotion belongs to the second conscious shock, and it is precisely here that the whole of this work comes into play, along with our evaluation of it. We can, of course, be negative, but must recognize and feel that it is not us that is negative, but it, the machine, the mannequin, we refer to always as I. This is the beginning of inner separation, of not identifying with negative states, and of not identifying with oneself. We can understand that to be taught the knowledge shared in this work about negative emotions is one thing, however, as mere knowledge it is quite useless, remaining theoretical only, in memory. We have to apply that knowledge to ourselves, which is only possible through self-observation. Unless we connect knowledge of this work with self-observation, nothing can happen to us and the work shall remain purely theoretical, not practical. The function of self-observation, therefore, is something that can be understood logically, its objectives are clear. However, at first self-observation is very crude, very irregular, and mixed up with life observations of oneself. The work mirror is mixed up with our life mirror, as this is inevitable. For a long time, a work mirror is little other than a life mirror, the Alice's Looking Glass of Lewis Carroll. It is, as it were, connected with the neutralizing force of life, and not neutralizing force of this work, whose force comes from an entirely different influence. As our evaluation of the work deepens, these two mirrors become separated, so that where we may derive a great deal of flattery and self-delight from one mirror, we do not see the same reflection in the other, which causes inner disruption. Yet the two mirrors are not antagonistic, they simply reflect different aspects of oneself. In the fourth way school, which is this work, we have to be both in the work and in life. The fourth way makes no contradiction between life and work. Some sides belong to life, while others to the work. It is perhaps like defragmenting and then sorting different eyes, then putting them in their right place, having the strength not to see merely opposites, That is the symbolism of caduceus. It is the distinction of eyes through inner taste. We need both the work and life, as from both we can get force. It is like two rooms, quite distinct and yet opening into one another, both being part of the same house of the self. No one is told in this work to cut themselves off from life, to go into a monastery or into the wilderness. The two are entirely different, and their force comes from two different sides altogether. Gurdjieff taught that everything this work teaches will help your life and help you to attain your life aim. Just imagine someone in this work who can pass into the affairs of life, and through inner work has learned not to identify. You can understand that such an individual might attain some aim in life far more easily than a mechanical negative person. However, in order to do so, that individual would continually have to feel the work, to such an extent that their evaluation of this work was far more intense and real to them than anything they valued or attained in life. We identify through the unobserved petty feelings of ourselves, which cause us to make endless internal accounts, building troves of negative systems within. This negativity, once formed, is very difficult to deal with. On that level, we do everything in a pseudo manner, from self-love, our self-liking, to advance the self in some way, to merit praise, and so we are easily hurt and grow dejected. Remove that stimulus and we scarcely appear to exist, seeming to wander aimlessly. This is being a machine, the mannequin. That basis of self-feeling does not lead far in the work, it is only vanquished by a sense of something far greater than ourselves. Which brings us to the question of self-remembering that is emphasized as the sister to self-observation. An individual, said Gurdjieff, should always remember themselves, but such as they are, they lack the force, and cannot even remember that they have to remember themselves. Ouspensky, when students badgered him as to what they should do, whether they should smoke or not, eat or not, and so on, would say, the most important thing is to remember yourself. You can do what you like, as long as you remember yourself. This might sound strange and appears to mean that we can do anything we like, as long as we remember ourselves. Supposing then that we give way to all our sensory appetites, and become identified, say, with our food, and then tell ourselves this is okay, because we are allowed to do anything, the work says so. It says we can do anything we like, as long as we remember ourselves, and it's obvious that if we are identified with our food, then we are not remembering ourselves. Self-remembering puts us into a different state of consciousness. That is the rationale of Zen. It's nothing more than focus, a concentration of awareness. In that state of consciousness, we cannot do certain things without going to sleep at once, and we can see it happening, we can see ourselves becoming identified. To put things differently, if you do certain things and remember yourself at the same time, you will do them in quite a different way. When you begin to understand the subtlety of this perspective, you can do what you like as long as you remember yourself. You will see that it really means that you cannot do what you like, at least in the ordinary way that you do things. One form of self-remembering is feeling the sense of, I am doing this, or I am saying this. If, when you are angry and speaking internally or externally in a bad way, you feel the sense of I saying this, then it will completely change the situation. You realize that it is saying things, your machine, your mannequin. Think to yourself, I am not me. Imagine, I am not Smith and Smith is not me. Or say that Mr. Bush says to himself, I am not Bush and Bush is not me. Or Mr. Taylor says, I am not Taylor and Taylor is not me. If we can say that to ourselves rightly, it will create a very strange feeling as to who we are. This feeling is connected with a sense of the dissolving of one's personality, which is one of the objectives of this work, expressed in the form that personality must be rendered passive, so that the real part of us, essence, can grow. However, this happens only through a long, gradual process of insight. Ouspensky commented, why don't you ask yourself sometimes, what is Smith up to? Suppose that we could always say to ourselves, what is Smith doing now? And Mr. Bush could say, what is Bush on about? And Mr. Taylor, what is Taylor up to? All of us could say correspondingly, the same thing in some real way. Occasionally, it would mean that there was some degree of inner separation within us, some awareness that one is not the same as their acquired personality, with all of its absorbed prides and buffers. This artificial avatar that life has built up in us, that we take as ourselves, not knowing any better. Such a feeling, such an inner sense, is the beginning of self-remembering. When we try to remember ourselves, we do not remember Smith or Jones. We do not wish to remember Smith, but of course they are always there. If we gather no feelings that we are not Smith, though anecdotally we are actually subservient to Smith, then when we remember ourselves, we shall simply recall Smith. Smith will always remember Smith mechanically, and certainly Smith will always be satisfied with Smith, no doubt regarding him as a marvelous person. In that case, self-remembering would only increase one's self-satisfaction. It would enhance personality, which is not self-remembering, it is remembering the wrong self. It is not a conscious act but a mechanical one. Notice how we always seem to justify ourselves. It is not a reaching up to something else, but an intensifying and justifying of what we already are. Therefore, it cannot lead to change in our level of being, and has nothing to do with self-remembering in a work sense, which usually means there is no real self-observation. Any self-observation done through the mirror of this work. The work has not yet begun to break up personality, and one is simply taking the work from personality as something added to our own merits, like a medal pinned to your jacket. Of course, this is not the work because the work cannot start from the fullness of personality. The work can only start when we realize that we are not what we thought, not what we pretend to be. We have only to read the Sermon on the Mount to see what is implied there. When the work really strikes home, this house of cards that one takes as oneself begins to fall apart. The work speaks about the necessity of coming to the point where one realizes one's own utter nothingness. This, however, is mercifully delayed, and not something we can artificially realize. We cannot pretend to be nothing. It is very painful to see a person pretending that they are nothing. Self-remembering is connected with all this. To remember yourself simply such as you are now is not self-remembering. Self-remembering comes down from above, and full self-remembering is a state of consciousness in which personality and all of its pretenses almost cease to exist entirely, and we are, so to speak, nobody, yet the fullness of this state, which is really bliss, makes us, for the first time, somebody. That is, jhana.